We flew into Cape Town, South Africa. It was a place we'd heard about so many times, with words like apartheid and names like Mandela. We'd been told it was an incredibly beautiful place, in many ways like our San Francisco. Cape Town is situated on the southeastern tip of Africa on the Atlantic Ocean. The indigenous people of the Cape, the Khoi, practiced pastoral agriculture in the region with their large herds of cattle. Then, in about 1500, the Khoi came in contact with European explorers and merchants. The Cape became a stopping point for ships going between Europe and the East Indies, now known as Southeast Asia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. Finally, Dutchmen arrived with the intention to stay. In 1652, the Dutch East India Company sent 31-year-old Jan van Riebeck to open and fortify the Cape as a way station on the trade route between the Netherlands and the East Indies. The primary purpose of this way station was to provide fresh provisions for the fleets sailing between Holland and Jakarta. The Khoi were marginalized and labeled Hottentots, a term they considered derogatory. Ultimately, in 1814, the British took control of the Cape from the Dutch. Ongoing encounters between Europeans and the indigenous people were often violent, and active warfare flared when traditional grazing land was taken over for farms. White against black became a way of life. The Khoi were steadily driven off their land. Whites came to completely control South Africa. The main thoroughfare in Cape Town is Adderley Street. We stayed in the Adderley Hotel in the heart of the old town.
In the morning, out our window, we looked down on Adderley Street and got ready for our first day in South Africa. Then we joined our guide, Fanuel, and fellow traveler, Eric, in the breakfast room of our hotel. Our local guide, Chris, met us with his van to drive us to the most prominent landmark in Cape Town, Table Mountain National Park, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's visible from just about everywhere in town. We were very lucky because it was a clear and sunny day for our visit to the top of the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, there's a rotating cable car that carries 65 people and gives a 360-degree view. Besides people, the cable car also carries water, which is used at the top. The water is also ballast to hold the car steady in the case of heavy winds. There has been a cableway here since 1929.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Table Mountain Aerial Cableway. For your own safety, kindly do step away from the side and release any and all handrails. The floor is about to rotate. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Table Mountain is a national park and part of a World Heritage Site, so please respect the environment by not picking any flowers, chipping away rocks or stones, feeding the wild animals, or wasting any water. Also place your litters in bins provided and stick to the demarcated pathways as they are there for your own safety. To all the cigarette smokers, smoking is only allowed at the 12 Apostle Terrace situated beneath the self-service cafe. As we dock and come to a complete stop, we will reach the height of 1,067 meters above sea level. That's approximately 3,500 feet.
The main feature of Table Mountain is its level plateau approximately 2 miles from side to side, edged by impressive cliffs. The plateau is flanked by pointy Lion's Head and Devil's Peak that forms a dramatic backdrop to Cape Town. This broad sweep of mountainous heights forms a natural amphitheater of the City Bowl and Table Bay Harbor. The flat top of the mountain is often covered by clouds, which the locals called the tablecloth. Today we had no clouds and no tablecloth. We did have Cape Town's famous panoramic view. In the middle of Table Bay Harbor sits Robben Island. Once used as a prison, Nobel laureate and former president of South Africa Nelson Mandela was incarcerated here for 18 of the 27 years he served behind bars before the fall of apartheid. To date, 3 of the former inmates of Robben Island have gone on to become president of South Africa. Table Mountain National Park was proclaimed in 1998. It became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 2004. The park runs north and south along the spine of Cape Peninsula. It's not a single contiguous area, but 3 separate sections: Table Mountain, a central section, and then Cape Point and the Cape of Good Hope. The diversity of rare flora is protected, including some endangered finbows found only in this area. In fact, there are more species of plant in Table Mountain National Park, over 2,000, than exist in the whole of the United Kingdom. Large predators that historically roam the area include the Cape leopard, which persisted as late as the 1920s, and tracks are claimed to still be found today. Indigenous animals include African penguins and baboons. Some native species have been reintroduced, such as the zebra and the bontebok antelope.
Ja, wir haben so viel Glück mit dieser Hier sind überhaupt nicht Wörter und ja, überall außer mal die Kurzzeit
Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back. Please do be informed that as we descend, that the floor beneath you will be rotating once again. Please stand clear from the side and do release the handrails. Thank you.
Lass los, genau. Lass los.
Das ist ja unfair. Die Expressroute.
We passed the famous Mount Nelson Hotel, where Van and I had made reservations for tea for the following evening. The five of us were headed from Table Mountain through a beautiful neighborhood filled with shops and villas. Our destination was another UNESCO World Heritage Site, Kirstenbosch National Botanical Garden. This garden holds over 4,000 varieties of indigenous flowers and plants, along with numerous birds. It rests on the lower slopes of the opposite side of Table Mountain from the cableway.
Beautiful picture.
Kirstenbosch was founded in 1913 to preserve the country's unique flora. It places a strong emphasis on the cultivation of the unique indigenous plants of the area. The gardens regularly exhibit Zimbabwean stone sculptures along the pathways. In 1660, Jan van Riebeck, that Dutchman in charge of the European settling of the area, had this hedge of wild almond planted as a barrier and perimeter for the Dutch colony. That makes this section of Van Riebeck's hedge over 350 years old. The land occupied by the gardens was bequeathed to the nation in 1902 by Cecil Rhodes, first Prime Minister of the Cape Colony and the chairman of De Beers Diamonds. This rare yellow form of the famous bird of paradise was created at Kirstenbosch and subsequently named Mandela's Gold in honor of Nelson Mandela. This amazing South African native, the daga plant, is widely used in traditional medicine and called wild cannabis because of the sensation felt when the flowers are smoked or used in tea. Kirstenbosch contains a unique canopy walkway called the boom slang. It's named for the highly venomous South African tree snake. Built for the garden's 100th anniversary in 2013, the boom slang snakes for 425 feet in the trees above the foliage. It was prefabricated and brought in to give panoramic views of the first botanical garden to be listed as a World Heritage Site. It's wheelchair accessible and at its highest point is 40 feet high. The stars of all South African flowers are the fynbos, commonly named the protea and sometimes called the sugar bush or honeypot. The protea is the national flower of South Africa and is widely distributed in the country. The most beautiful is the pink-colored flower. These flowers have an artichoke-like appearance and have a long vase life in arrangements and are excellent as dried flowers.
Nobel Square contains the statues of 4 South African Nobel Peace Prize laureates, Albert Luthuli, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and former presidents F.W. de Klerk and Nelson Mandela. They took the road to democracy that was long and filled with hardship, yet these remarkable men held their belief in a peaceful way forward. We were dropped off at the Victoria and Alfred waterfront. We had time on our own for lunch and to explore the bustling harbor. It's a working harbor, but it has over 450 retail shops and restaurants. The Red Clock Tower, built in 1882, is a prominent landmark of the area. The harbor was begun in 1860 and named for the British Queen and her second son, Alfred. The swing bridge was constructed in 1997 to provide access to 2 parts of the marina and basin. Foot traffic passes over the swing bridge until a boat requests passage. Then horns sound and the gates are closed to allow the boats to pass through to gain access to the open water. We picked the Cape Town Fish Market restaurant because its menu is filled with seafood and South African Sauvignon Blanc wine. It also has a great view of the swing bridge and the boats passing back and forth from the basin. We had our first opportunity to spend South African rand. Nelson Mandela appears on one side of the banknotes and African animals on the other. After our lunch, we headed to the Robben Island Museum ferry. We had made online reservations for the 2 o'clock boat to the Island Prison Museum. We boarded a catamaran for the half-hour ride to the island. Pulling away from the dock, we could see the swing bridge and watched as a diverse assortment of boats passed by. Then we sailed into the basin, passing all kinds of boats and old cranes used for loading cargo. We sailed out onto the beautiful Table Bay with a full view of Cape Town and headed for Robben Island Prison Museum.
afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Indeed, you are wonderful. My name is Zozo. Lulamile Matula can call me Zozo. Or Lulamile Jesus. This office here on my left-hand side, it was called a reception. They gave us our prison numbers, uniforms, and prison regulations. Our leader, Father Nelson Mandela, was also given his number. His number is still applicable today because I'm still a leader. Therefore, Father Nelson Mandela was given this number, 4666/64. 494 were partly divided. Is that true? Whites along this side, Indians, Kalatinas one side were divided. Black and white. In our country, we are united. There is no more color division anymore, no more bandus, no more Afrikaners, no more Indians, no more colors, no more white people. We are all the same. Some are said today, we are a rainbow nation. Therefore, my dear friends, go back to your countries, go and tell your mother and your friends that is of God, they are all equal in front of the law. Your demonstrations, your petitions, Your boycotts made a huge impact in our struggle to Africa. We are one and united. Thanks to you, my dear from abroad.
I would bleed for you. I would bleed for love.
This is from a movie about Winnie Mandela. She served 491 days in prison, many of them in solitary confinement.
To dismantle apartheid physically in this country.
The government declared an ongoing state of emergency, imposing curfews, broad censorship, and sweeping laws with extreme punishment, including executions. Foreign banks, already nervous, called in their loans. The rand slid, and the pressure rose. Even some of the government's own began questioning apartheid.
There's no justification for keeping Mr. Mandela in prison, and that the only way in which we can start resolving the problems of our country is in an unconditional release of Mr. Mandela.
Recovering from tuberculosis, Mandela was moved to an isolated section of prison, where conversations began in earnest with the government. When President Botha suffered a stroke and was forced to resign, F.W. de Klerk took the reins. In a series of preliminary talks, Mandela and de Klerk paved the way for the ANC and the government to sit down together and negotiate. When Parliament opened the following February, de Klerk announced that all political parties were to be unbanned and political prisoners released. On the 11th of February 1990, Nelson Mandela walked out of prison after 27 years, free at last.
Call on the international community to continue the campaign to isolate the apartheid regime, to lift sanctions now would be to run the risk of aborting the process towards the complete eradication of apartheid. Our march to freedom is irreversible.
Given the corruption, treachery, and the years of imprisonment endured by Nelson Mandela, it is remarkable and admirable that he did not allow any of this to corrupt his own morality. The freedom he desired was not a ruthless revenge of black people over white people. He detested racism of any kind, and now he envisaged a South Africa of equals, working together to save a country that was spiraling out of control. Years of suffering and frustration had created an increasingly angry and militant mindset amongst the black population, and many districts had become virtually ungovernable.
We took the bus, after the very moving tour of the prison, to the waterfront, with its dazzling view across from Cape Town and Table Mountain. We were reminded of San Francisco and the view of the city from Alcatraz, another former prison island in another stunningly beautiful place. That night, our group went for a home-hosted meal in a neighborhood called Grassy Park. Our hostess, Naomi, greeted us and gave a tour of her second-floor apartment that has a kitchen, bathroom, dining room, living room, and 2 bedrooms. We had a wonderful dinner. Naomi, along with our local guide Chris and her husband Cedric, talked frankly about their lives during the dark days of apartheid. They're so much happier with the new freedoms, and their lives have changed significantly for the better.
Mama na mwana tumba na tujali bisutele. Na mwana tumba na tujali bisutele. Mama na mwana tumba na tujali bisutele.
The next morning we had free time for exploring on our own. We planned the day to begin with a walk down Long Street. London has Soho, New Orleans the French Quarter, and Cape Town has Long Street. Architecturally, it's noted for its Victorian buildings with wrought iron balconies. Long Street's buildings, with their follies and intricate ironwork, have been mostly well kept. That's because a number of preservation societies, heritage groups, and architects constantly protect the structures from the wrecking ball. In fact, many of the buildings have been restored over the years. From sundown to early morning, the restaurants, bars, and late-night clubs are all about party, party, party. We were out in the morning and the revelers were gone. The streets were quiet. At the end of Long Street is St. George's Mall. This is a street market mostly selling the colorful souvenirs of Africa. A little drizzle had begun, but it didn't prevent us from enjoying our stroll. We came into a courtyard where the statue of British King Edward VII stands in front of Cape Town City Hall.
Next come the buildings of the Parliament, a mixture of Greek Revival, Victorian, and modern. The buildings hold the offices of the government of the Republic. South Africa is a constitutional democracy with a three-tiered system and an independent judiciary. The 9 provinces of South Africa have their own three-tiered systems, but no separate judiciary. Jacob Zuma, President of the Republic, is shown here holding the FIFA World Cup in soccer. The games were held in Cape Town in 2010. Next, we walk back to near our hotel to the top of Adderley Street into the area called the Company's Garden. The Dutch East India Company had their gardens here to replenish ships as they rounded the Cape on their spice trade voyages. In the garden is the Tuinhuis. Constructed by the Dutch in 1700, it's the residence of the leader of South Africa. It was used by the British when they took over the Cape Colony in 1814. In 1947, the British royal family visited here. The most famous resident of the Tuinhuis was Cecil Rhodes. He was an imperialist, businessman, mining magnate, and politician. He came from Britain to South Africa in 1871 and joined in the diamond trade. Funded by the Rothschilds, Rhodes succeeded in gaining a monopoly of the mines, setting all prices. Rhodes ultimately formed De Beers Diamonds in 1888. Rhodes financed the Cairo to Cape Town Railway, currently 3/4 complete. It contains the Victoria Falls Bridge, which we had walked across earlier on our tour. Cecil Rhodes became Prime Minister of the Cape Colony in 1890. In 1902, Rhodes died aged 48. His funeral procession went down Adderley Street. His most positive legacy is the Rhodes Scholarship, awarded by his alma mater, Oxford University. We decided we needed a cup of coffee and went into the cafe located in the company garden. Back out into the company garden, we wandered around the huge variety of areas.
Finally, it was time to meet our reservation at the Mount Nelson Hotel at the opposite end of the company garden from our hotel. The Mount Nelson Hotel opened in 1899. The first hotel in South Africa to offer hot and cold running water, it was described as being even better than its London counterparts. The first advertisement in the Cape Times newspaper read as follows: "This large and splendid hotel, beautifully situated in the gardens at the top of Government Avenue, in the most airy and healthy part of Cape Town, offers visitors all the comforts of a first-class hotel at reasonable charges." Our tea cost 265 Rand each, about $20 a person. This was our dinner for the evening. We considered this to be a very reasonable charge.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We indulged ourselves with scones and clotted cream, small quiche, cucumber and salmon sandwiches, and all the usual suspects. Then we went back to the buffet table laden with desserts to scoop up on eclairs, caramel, fudge cake, and tiramisu. Ultimately, we left the hotel through the back garden filled with whimsical sculpture.
St. George's Cathedral, once the seat of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, sits at the end of the company's garden. It's the site of many demonstrations during the fight to end apartheid. A group of mixed-race schoolgirls attests to the success of that long road to freedom.
The next morning, we passed by Table Mountain, this time covered with its tablecloth of clouds. We were headed out to spend the entire day in the countryside in the Stellenbosch Wine District. Just a half-hour drive outside of Cape Town, you were at the beginning of the Cape Vineyards. where cultivation of grapes dates back to the 1600s. Today, this is the largest winemaking region in South Africa, and organized wine tourism has become big business. Estates are large, and every winery offers its own style of wine experience. Our first wine estate was Hartenberg. A map on the wall showed their various vineyards growing both red and white grapes. A young man told us the history of the various owners and their wines. The first settlers to cultivate the virgin land of the estate were granted permission to work 60 morgen, or 150 acres of land, in 1692. The estate passed through many owners, including a freed slave named Aaron van Ceylon. Today it's owned by the Mackenzie family, who boasts a fighter pilot hero of the Battle of Britain. They have named one of their wines for this illustrious member of their family. The region has a Mediterranean climate with hot, dry summers and cool, wet winters. The district lies at the foot of a mountain range, which provides soil favorable to viticulture. Grapes grown in this area are mainly used for wine production, as opposed to table grapes. We drove down the Bird of Paradise line driveway to the Fairview Estate.
And the Carignan, all three grapes from Spain. And for us to grow a Spanish grape, we needed Spanish climate. This area, Paul, was too wet in winter. So we grow these grapes behind the mountain, about 65 kilometers from here, in a little area named Swartland. Warmer there, drier, no dams, no rivers. Areas well known for corn and wheat, and if you drive through that area you need to have a good look to spot a grapevine, because the vineyards in that area mainly grow bush vine, and the highest a bush vineyard grow is to your knee. They sometimes look young, they sometimes look not looked after, but the best quality wines in our country is harvested from a tiny little bush vine. A lower hill, there's grapes, there's stress, a lot of quality. And a bush vineyard can only be harvested by hand. Machines cannot go that low. So this grapes is all hand-picked, and it's a grape variety that gets to spend 16 months in a second-time use French oak barrel. And it's also part of our limited range wine, so smaller production.
After our Fairview wine experience, we did a drive-through of one other estate. This was De Laer Graaf, which has stunningly beautiful views as it sits at the wide expanse at the foot of the mountains, revealing a sculpture garden and the wonderful autumn color of the vines.
Lunch was on our own in the picturesque town of Franschhoek, founded by the Dutch in 1688. It's filled with shops and restaurants. We wandered around, stopping at the yellow town hall, built in Cape Dutch style. It's a distinctive and recognizable design, the prominent feature being grand, ornately rounded gables, reminiscent of the features of townhouses in Amsterdam.
Victor Verster Prison was the last place that Nelson Mandela was incarcerated during his 27 years in prison for conspiracy to overthrow the apartheid government of South Africa. We stopped to see this statue erected to this hero of civil rights during his 90th birthday celebration in 2008. Heading back to the coast, we passed acres of township shanties. They are the residence of the poor, those shoved aside during the apartheid era, and those who continue to pour into the city in their hunt for work. Apartheid may have ended 20 years ago, but here the sense of apartness remains very strong.
On the coast, we headed to areas that are populated with residences, primarily of the whites of South Africa. Many sit at the foot of Table Mountain. Just below the cableway station is the beautiful and affluent suburb of Clifton. It's loaded with mansions that overlook sweeping views of the Atlantic Ocean. It's one of the few areas well protected from the notorious southeasterly winds, which has a great deal to do with its popularity with bathers and surfers.
So we're into Clifton now. So out of Bantry Bay, Clifton. So you will notice the English names, British names, Bantry Bay, Clifton, and again this is the 12 Parcel Mountain Range that you saw yesterday from.
Yeah.
So people do commute out, in and out, to go to workplaces around, into town and surrounding places, but also many people work locally, guest houses, on the harbour, fishing boats.
Hout Bay is known among surfers for its spectacular waves, cold water, and numerous shark encounters. Also known as dungeons to the surfing community, the area currently sits dormant, but changes when winter comes to the southern hemisphere. Swells that have run the length of the Atlantic slam into its numerous reefs. This is one of the 16 recognized big wave spots around the globe. The annual Red Bull Big Wave Africa competition is held here with waves up to 47 feet high.
Yeah, there's nothing holding this side up, so we need to get through here quickly. Alright, we're through there. See, nicely carved out and... I can imagine all these layers of sandstone here on top of us here.
You have to trust in engineering. It's like crossing a bridge. Were they an A student or a C student?
The flag will be changed. There's 4 different color flags that we have. So that black flag means there's no sharks.
Noordhoek is a spectacularly located town with many thatched roofed houses and endless sea views. There's a large stables and numerous horses in residence. Riding on the long sandy beach is one of the greatest attractions. It's also an artist community and a favorite getaway spot.
Gisteraan was jy my dingetje gewees. Kyk hoe lyk jy nou. Gisteraan was jy my dingetje gewees. En nou het ek berou. Die ou nou en ou baas as baas op die plaas. Vir my wat die vleitjie blaas. Die ou nou en ou baas as baas op die plaas. Dis vir my wat die vleitjie blaas.
Maybe they're taking...
Here's the bontebok on the side here. One of the antelopes I said to you.
We pulled over to the side of the road as we'd spotted some people up ahead. They were looking at a herd of bontebok antelope which were grazing on the side of the hill. It was in 1837 that a local farmer saved the last 17 bontebok on Earth. The bontebok don't jump, so with a simple fence the farmer prevented their extinction. In his day, hunting the last of a species was considered an achievement rather than a disgrace. So, that pet sanctuary literally stood between the bontebok and extinction. Today, it's estimated that there are only 3,500.
Yeah, of course, both the male and the female, it's got the horns, you know, so.
The name of the book is the Kaili Chapel Sneakers. You see this song, so it's number 7, Shosholoza. Number 7, you see.
Nestled in a sheltered cove is a world-famous colony of African penguins. Although it's in the midst of a residential area, it's one of the few sites where this endangered bird can be observed at close range. From just 2 breeding pair in 1982, this penguin colony has grown to about 2,200. This is partly due to the reduction of commercial trawling, which has increased the supply of pilchards and anchovy that form part of the penguin diet.
abazali bami mandiphuma isingekoli mntanami noma kwenze njani usungayithi male kwabantu mama bandiyala abazali bami mandiphuma isingekoli mntanami noma kwenze njani usungayithi male ubegoli kunzima
Bandiyala
wachuma
abasale bona
unezindunduma
Bandiphuma
imtana
Isinde
egoli mtanami
mntanami
kwimtana
Noma kwenze njani
uma kwenze njani sungayedlima ubegoli kunzima
Bandiyala
imtana
abasale bona
unezindunduma
Bandiphuma
iwawa
Isinde
egoli mtanami
mntanami
iwawa
Noma kwenze njani
uba kwenze njani sungayedlima yekho.
African penguins can swim at an average speed of 4 miles an hour and stay submerged for about 2 minutes. Their distinctive black and white coloring is a form of camouflage, white for underwater predators looking upwards, and black for predators looking down into the water. Of the 1.5 million African penguins estimated in 1910, only 10% remained at the end of the 20th century. Harvesting of penguin eggs and scraping of guano were other reasons for the drop in population. Newborn chicks are covered in down, which is not waterproof. When the chicks are about the age of 30 days, both parents go to sea. Youngsters are left alone and often congregate in what is called crushes, mainly for protection. The coastal towns of the Cape are typical beach towns and contain the same shops, restaurants, and sleeping accommodations characteristic of towns by the water. If you blinked, you could be in Windansea in Southern California or Bondi Beach in Australia. We stopped to eat at the famous Black Marlin restaurant in Simonstown on the way to the Cape of Good Hope. Once a whaling station, this historic building is a perfect setting for a seafood meal on the garden terrace with an ocean view. The garden is home to a 100-year-old Camellia japonica tree, which blossoms red, pink, and white. Our table was under the tree. During whale season, early July to December, diners often enjoy their meal while watching whales sliding along the coastline. There were no whales in April, but a fast tourist boat for us to admire. We ordered fish soup and fish on a skewer, presented in a unique manner.
In 1486, the navigator Bartholomew Diaz sailed from Lisbon with a fleet of 3 ships. He aimed to sail round the southern point of Africa to establish a trade route to India. A tremendous storm took place. Diaz then found himself on the eastern side of the Cape. He turned back because of insufficient supplies, but he realized he had discovered the sea route. Diaz changed the name, then in use, Cape of Storms, to Cape of Good Hope. In 1498, Vasco da Gama was successful in rounding the Cape and getting to India. So, da Gama gets most of the credit for the achievement.
Osisikele Afrika ye maluphakanyisu pondolwayo ye izwa imithandazo yethu Nkosi sikelela thina lusapho lwayo Oza moya, oza moya, oza, oza moya, oza moya, oza, oza moya, oi, nwele, usi, sigele, tina, lusapho lwayo. Move, we'll move it, we'll move it, we'll move it.
At the end of the long, long road is Cape Point with its iconic lighthouse. It sits at 34 degrees of southern latitude, about the same latitude as Santiago, Chile, which sits at 33 degrees south. At Cape Point is a funicular that goes up the very steep hill to the lighthouse. It's called the Flying Dutchman, named after the opera by Richard Wagner about a ghost ship and the Cape of Good Hope.
Emandulo, 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 wakumnandi, Emandulo, babetlenza, bebetinqomo, Emandulo, e-Afrika, wakumnandi, e-Afrika. Wakumnandi sidla mazimba ngehla lokoko awubuye buya Afrika aw buya Afrika ubuyela kwinto zamandulo buya Afrika buya sibonwabele buya Afrika Sigonwabele Africa, 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 Sigonwabele Africa.
Cape of Good Hope, the most southwestern point of the African continent. Cabo de Bois Esperanza. The Cape of Good Hope, or in Afrikaans we also say Kaap die Goeie Hoop. So this is a must for anybody coming to this part of the world. You will notice people are gathering at this particular signage, so this is where you would like to get your picture taken, saying you have been here, you've got the photo.
I have a tradition of putting my feet in water that's at the edge of the world. Eric decided to join me in this tradition. We removed our shoes and socks on the rocky, seaweed-covered beach. It was thrilling to think that this was the very tip of South Africa.